So in one fell swoop, 130 plus conversations happened. 130 plus people felt the amazing difference that they were making to a cause they cared about.
He says he knew he'd got through when the comms team said, yes, but how can this campaign work for fundraising? And the fundraising team said, yes, but how can this campaign work for awareness and marketing? He was like, my job is done. We're not just thinking of ourselves. That is true silo smashing. He changed who he was following, changed who and how he was interacting with them on LinkedIn, managed to get a meeting in with a company, and in that meeting they talked about his LinkedIn post. And he was like, honestly, Ben, I wrote this post hoping that they're the sort of donor that would be listening to it. And they even mentioned it, and yet now they're talking about and have agreed a part of the charity that company will be funding.
Hey there, brave fundraisers. Welcome to the Fundraising Bright Spot Show. This is episode 169, and this is the podcast for fundraisers who want ideas and maybe even a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and really enjoy your job. This time we're going to do another quick episode where we suggest certain episodes that it might be worth making time to listen to, because we've had various feedback that they've helped people a lot in 2024. I'm again recording with my colleague Ben. Ben, how are you?
I'm very good, Rob. Excited because, yes, there's more excellent pods to talk to people about now.
Yeah, so we did the first of these review episodes, and then you still had some more you wanted to share. So we've agreed to do a second one. To get the ball rolling, what's an episode that you would definitely recommend people listen to if they can?
Do you know, this one is all about where we choose our focus. I distinctly remember us having a conversation about the number of people who we talked to initially when we first come into contact with them, or when I'm first coaching them, who just feel a bit exhausted by everything. They're not really sure what best to do. They feel like donors aren't responding to them. They feel like they've got a big fundraising target, and their resilience, I think, feels quite low. And yet, I think it was hot off of perhaps we were right in the middle of our mastery programs, where that is not how people feel. It's different. And I just noticed that I think it was the third or fourth time you had shared a particular set of ideas or principles or where people could focus their time, which even just hearing you talk about had totally shifted my own morale and state. And then obviously I use it and it helps people too. And we realized we should have a conversation about this to help a fundraiser who's struggling with targets, struggling to get meetings, struggling not knowing what to do to get a response. I love this because you gave them a jolt of some ideas to help. I believe it is podcast number 152 and 153. But tell me, Rob, this is all about focus.
Yeah. So a key theme, people who know our work well, that we teach is the notion of not so much chasing the money or the partnerships, but putting way more energy than most people do into improving relationships, and in particular to getting conversations with people who care about your cause. And though that is still not easy a lot of the time, it's not the easiest task you might do today, it is easier than many people necessarily realize. And that's a key thing I love about our programs, is that we help people get better at getting more chats. Sometimes we call them test drives with people, even just informal chats over coffee or a quick Zoom call with people who care about your cause. Now, initially, when people hear that, they presume, oh, well, I've got to pick up the phone, have I? Or they presume, yeah, but I've emailed 4 times, Rob, and I got ignored 4 times when I requested a conversation. And they presume I just mean try harder at those 2 tactics that already may not be working for you. And whilst it is true that there are things you can do to increase your effectiveness and reduce your stress in both those areas, phone and email, actually, the key thing isn't so much about phone or email. It is, what could you do to improve relationships today with people who care about your cause? That's the question to ask. And when you ask that question and you relax a little and notice what's available to you, often there are more opportunities and resources available to you than you might have realized. And we recorded that episode, 153, I think it was, of examples of various fundraisers who've been on our programs who've done some slightly left field, slightly creative things, to wonderful effect. And the lead story is someone who worked for a hospice in Wales, and she had heard that during a particular week in the summer, her colleagues were due to hire a marquee for various events that they needed to do to help the overall strategy of the hospice. This was not to help fundraising, but they inquired and discovered there were 1 or 2 days when the marquee, which was going to be up all week, was not going to be used. And they just had a couple of chats with colleagues in the hospice and realised that actually, since it was going to be there anyway, this would be a wonderful opportunity to invite lots of donors who'd been generous all year to come and feel thanked for the wonderful difference their generosity had made. And long story short, that's what they made happen. Of course, it required some extra work, but all of the people in the fundraising team extended invitations to different people who pledged legacies, companies that had supported, major donors, community supporters, lots of different people who'd made a difference were invited to a big, wonderful thanking event. I don't think they needed to pay at all. I think it might have been sponsored, where the tea and cake or even the glass of bubbly had been sponsored by someone. So for relatively little cost, because the marquee was there anyway, they got on their phones and their emails and they sent out invitations. And I think more than 130, 140 people came to this event. So in one fell swoop, 130 plus conversations happened. 130 plus people felt the amazing difference that they were making to a cause they cared about. And it was really clear this was not a fundraising event. There was no big ask. People did donate because they wanted to donate, but they just met each other. They felt solidarity. They felt connection with others similar to them. They heard some strong stories about the difference that they were making as a collective, and they had a wonderful time. And I think they left far more likely to support again, far more likely to respond to an invitation for an extra catch-up coffee than they would have done had this wonderful fundraising director not spotted this opportunity, this resource, which was under her nose. And of course, maybe our listener would have spotted that opportunity too. I bet you would. But I think in some charities, this opportunity would not have been made use of. And that's our point. Sometimes there are opportunities happening all around you that actually you could use to help you deepen wonderful relationships with your supporters.
I love that. And you know, when I talked to fundraisers who are very, very successful, maybe they've been doing the job for 15 plus years, they sometimes struggle to remember what it was like to not notice all these different ways to deepen a relationship. And so sometimes I talk to them and they're like, newer people to this sector or to my team, there were these 3 events we had and they didn't invite a single donor. Or we had these cool things happening and they didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I just don't see it. And I think it's because it's not necessarily the tactic, the marquee, that's the thing. It's the question that's asked before it. And I know you go into detail on this, but what is it that I can do to deepen relationships today? And when that is the question that's asked, not how much money can I raise or how many partnerships can I bring in or how many trusts can I get to do, but like it's what can I do today to deepen relationships, then the answer might be lean on my colleagues to use the marquee for longer, but it might also be a whole host of other smaller, more practical, more tangible things too. And I love that the episode, I think, is you just riffing and saying, well, here's another one that someone told me about a week later, and another one, and another one, and the results of that. Were there any out of all of those that you would love to share?
Yes, Ben. The key thing people have fed back to me, having listened to that episode, is that something about hearing the examples, because there are several that I share, is even though they don't necessarily apply the same technique, because they haven't got a marquee, they've tended to spot more opportunities in the few days following the episode than they necessarily had been noticing before. Of course, that's most likely to be easy to implement if one's relationships with other teams within the charity are relatively good. And goodness me, I know that we don't take that for granted. In many charities, it's not always the default. That's not necessarily anyone's particular fault, but many charities can struggle with what one might call siloism.
Yeah, and Rob, many people talk to me about the need to smash silos, which is exciting because I think this year you've had some great episodes on that topic of smashing through internal silos.
Yeah, so definitely this would be one of my must listens. And it's episode 147 and also 148 if you have the time as well. It's with the wonderful Joe Jenkins from the Children's Society. And it's all about the fact that he hates silos. He always has. And honestly, dear listener, more than anyone else I've ever talked to or had the chance to study the techniques of, Joe Jenkins has made more progress in this area than any other fundraising leader I know, and I've been in fundraising for 25 years. So his starting point is this. He observes that when we are at our best personally, and when our teams are at our best, two things tend to be going on. Number one, we tend to be connected to the why we're here and the difference we could be making. And secondly, we tend to feel that we're all pulling in the same direction and that colleagues in our team and in different teams are all going in the same direction together as well. A big challenge for many organisations, including for charities, is that that is not automatic. Interestingly, Joe observes that very often the times when great fundraising and or policy work and or lobbying work and or communications work, when that happens, it often happens in spite of the structure or culture of a charity rather than because of it. And so for years, he's been fascinated about both culture and structure, and he's experimented with different ways of deliberately creating those things to make it easier, as he would put it, to create the conditions where success can happen, where people can be at their best.
And Rob, are there particular things? I know that the podcast was split between two parts, part one and part two. And part one, Joe seems to talk a lot about things he's tried in the past. And then in part two, it's about what he's done at the moment in his current role.
Yeah, so it's so compelling when he talks about when he was at Friends of the Earth, because we talk about this wonderful success, the award-winning bee campaign that Friends of the Earth created years ago. And there are many techniques about it which are impressive and have been spoken about at conferences and written up as case studies. But Joe's point is that 2 years before the bee campaign happened, he and other leaders met and decided how are we going to solve the challenges of siloism and help all the different parts of this organisation and those outside of the organisation who care about the environment. How are we going to create the conditions for success whereby we can all pull in the same direction? And it's really interesting. The particular technique or methodology is called Team of Teams, but the results are absolutely striking in terms of the bee campaign raising far more money than any Friends of the Earth campaign ever had before. And also so much wonderful campaigning activity happening, really innovative, different things that people were encouraged to do, and they went off and did that within Friends of the Earth they would never have been able to do themselves or thought of doing themselves. And ultimately, the mission of persuading the government to change its strategy and create for the first time a pollinator strategy for the environment in the UK, that stated campaign goal was achieved, as well as all the fundraising and as well as so many people inside and outside the organisation coming together and enjoying doing great work. Joe suggests that all of that happened because of the slightly more boring, harder work that had started 2 years earlier to create the culture and the structure and the conditions for success.
Wherever Joe has been, I think you eventually see great results, both at Friends of the Earth. That's a campaign that they thought would be for a year, and now nearly 10 years on, it's still going. And he says at Children's Society, I believe, that early on after implementing this, they've had campaigns that have had incredible success. But internally, he didn't feel like it had the same sense of silo smashing. But I love that he says, I've been there now many years, and it's the same message that I keep doing day in, day out. And now things are beginning to change. And it's not just success we're seeing on the outside, but you know that the teams are working together. By the way, one of my favourite quotes from it, Rob, and people, you should listen to this, I won't do this justice, is when he says he knew he'd got through when the comms team said, yes, but how can this campaign work for fundraising? And the fundraising team said, yes, but how can this campaign work for awareness and marketing? He was like, my job is done. We're not just thinking of ourselves. That is true silo smashing. I agree. I love those episodes. So good. You recorded 2.
Hey dear listener, it's Rob here, and Ben and I are very excited about a special masterclass which we are delivering once only in 2025. Ben, what's the event?
It is Wow Your Donors, a topic that is so powerful that you and I have been flown out to Italy, to Holland, to Norway, to Kenya, and for one day only, it is coming to London. This topic is so powerful that immediately afterwards, people often get in touch with ways that they've used it, whether that's to get meetings, whether that's to engage donors. In fact, I've got a note here from Emily Evans at Alzheimer's Society, who said, it sparked ideas and moments we used straight away in a £5 million pitch, which we won. Thank you for your time, energy, and wow ideas. It's Wow Your Donors. And Rob, is it the 30th of January it's coming?
Yes, that's right, Ben. It's happening once in 2025, and it's happening live on the 30th of January. A key thing I like about it is that many charities just are underdogs right now. The odds feel against you because frankly they are. And of all the techniques I've studied in the last 20 years that can help you raise more money, this is the one at the top of my list for how you can break through even as an underdog and turn the odds in your favour, to get the conversation, to improve your chances of winning, to be successful with your trust application, to win the pitch and so on. The very nature of this technique means you do things which most fundraisers and most charities would not do, and donors and funders and companies notice that, they feel that, they love it, and they become more generous. So if you like this podcast, if you've ever enjoyed our Breakfast Club for Fundraising Leaders and you found my ideas helpful, then a whole day with me learning Wow Your Donors techniques will help you. It's happening on the 30th of January. And if you're curious, please take action now. We will put a link in the episode notes, or go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services and look for Wow Your Donors. I really hope you can make it. Ben and I will see you there. Okay, Ben, this year we've recorded several episodes to help corporate fundraisers, and I think you wanted to suggest another of these that people should listen to now.
Yeah, absolutely. Episode 155 with Chris Swart. There's a number of things I like about it, but one of them is Chris says very early on that the tactic he will talk about, which I think any fundraiser can use to help them, the tactic he'll talk about is one that he first heard on the podcast a year and a half ago. He was listening to Paul Courtney's episode about creating events and using them to be able to engage donors, not to fundraise, but to be able to deepen relationships with them. Fundraiser, you're sensing a theme. I think for me, it's exactly why you created the podcast, Rob, so that someone can hear a brilliant example, think through their own organisation, not copy it in its entirety, but think through how best it fits for them and then give it a go and try it. And I love this episode because Chris, different sort of charity, different sort of cause, tries out the tactic of deliberately using events to be able to engage donors, not to ask them for money. In fact, there's a rule in his events that we will not ask you for money, but deliberately to just try and build and deepen the relationships in lots of different ways. And this podcast works so well that Chris, not only has it been his most successful fundraising year ever, corporate fundraising by far, but I know it worked because I was training a team the other month, and the leader of the team said to me when we started talking about this particular tactic, we were talking about how you can best use the events that are around you to engage donors. She said, "Team, have you listened to podcast episode 155? And then she went on to talk about the various impact that it had had for Chris. And within seconds, it was like someone had waved a magic wand. The team were thinking through 2 or 3 different ways they could replicate Chris's ideas and tactics to help them. Like I urge you, I'm not going to go into a huge amounts of detail on this because I think Fundraiser, after this push play on episode 155, Rob, there were lots of things you enjoyed about chatting to Chris. What were they?
Yeah, one of them for me is that for years on our Corporate Mastery and Major Gifts Mastery, we've obviously encouraged fundraisers to find ways to deepen relationships with supporters, to add value proactively rather than initially be chasing the money. And there are many ways of doing that. And one of them has always been your event strategy. And in particular, not so much events for raising money on the night, and those obviously remain a valuable tactic in a fundraising portfolio, whether it's a gala dinner or a pub quiz. Events to raise money is a valuable tactic. But what we're saying, especially for corporate fundraising and major gift fundraising, is the idea of creating an event that you can use as part of your strategy to entice potential supporters or partners to come and find out what you're all about, with the bar low, so it's easy for them to say yes to, and as a wonderful recurring method of keeping your existing supporters happy and re-inspired by the energy and the inspiration they get from hearing about the amazing difference they're making. We've long shared that and examples of that in our mastery programs. The reason I love this one is sometimes smaller charities understandably feel that they just haven't got the resource to put on those kinds of events. Chris is one of the charities that is really quite small, and he's found a way to do it. These events have happened for the last 2.5 years, 3 times a year. And he's managed to do it crucially by finding a recipe that's fairly efficient, fairly easy to replicate. Now, it is hard work, and they work hard on them, but they're always hosted by one of the partners of his small cancer charity, one of the corporate partners. He's got the same broad recipe for what kinds of things happen, although he changes the speaker each time and changes the activity slightly each time. But rather than once a year we put all of our energy into a big expensive event and then we're exhausted, quite deliberately their strategy is to, in any given year, have 3 different opportunities to invite people to. And crucially, the existing partners, they end up coming to several things over the last couple of years. And of course, they're more loyal because drip, 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 those relationships have built up and that loyalty and that inspiration has built up. So if our listener works for an organization with fewer resources, whether or not you're a corporate fundraiser, I really recommend listening to it because it's an example of how you can add consistent value to really deepen relationships, and it be possible to do in spite of lack of resources.
I love it. And Rob, whenever I do a piece of work with the charity, some of our next level work or a in-house mastery for them, or even a day's training, one of the questions I will ask is, what are the events that either you own or one of your team owns that you might be able to piggyback on? And when we work quite deliberately in the same way that I think Chris does and talks through how he does, to ask ourselves the question, how do we use it? What can we learn from the previous events? How would that change how we invite someone? How would it change what we do after the event? How would it change what we say on the speech? This sort of growth mindset, it's fascinated me, the difference between an event that they did a year ago, where they might have got 3 meetings afterwards, to one charity I work with, by the way, Rob, they had 57 companies attend, more than they ever had done before. 57 attend. They got 40 test drives, 40 meetings afterwards. Lots of it is what you just described. If we do this 3 times a year, we learn. We don't lament if something didn't work. We just say, how might it change next time? And I love that Chris generously talks through ideas and ways that they do this, including how one company chose to give them not just a one-off partnership of £10,000 a year, but it was this event that helped them decide it would be £10,000 for as long as that CEO was in charge. He said, it's not going to be a one-off gift of 10,000. It will now be for as long as I'm in charge. Listen to the episode. I think you'll enjoy it. It's one of the most practical ones. The most practical one, though, Rob, that I think we get feedback on the most is one of your picks. Is that right?
Yes, I think more than any other episode this year, the one we've had most feedback about people applying it and soon after getting results is episode 150 with the brilliant Michelle Benson. And it's all about how to proactively use LinkedIn as a tool to help you build relationships with the right funders, and particularly to entice them to contact with you and want coffee with you. So one of the things that's happened is someone from a fairly small environmental charity listened to this episode that I recommended when she was on our corporate mastery program, and she applied the ideas from the episode for 5 days in a row only taking about 10 minutes each day. And on the 6th day, she was contacted by a funder that was on her list that she really wanted coffee with. But crucially, the funder contacted her proactively and asked for a meeting. And that's a wonderful story. The key thing is I've heard versions of that story repeatedly. So what is it that Michelle teaches in the episode? She starts with 2 or 3 key insights. The first is that we need to understand that funders, companies, major donors in any particular area tend to know each other because they connect. They go to the same conferences and meetings. Secondly, that most fundraisers tend to link in with each other rather than mostly with those funders. And the third insight that really helped me is Michelle told me that almost everyone on LinkedIn is silent. She said 95% of the people on LinkedIn never interact or post or engage at all. Right. So what do we do with these 3 insights? Crucially, Michelle, and she's an expert on LinkedIn and an experienced fundraiser, she teaches us to proactively link in with the kinds of major donors or funders or foundations or companies that do care about your topic. So if you're a homelessness charity, proactively link in more with funders in that space. And what will happen then is if you ever interact with them at all, hundreds or indeed thousands of other entities like them potentially will see that interaction, and over time they will therefore become more familiar with you and start to trust you. And the second key piece of advice is do interact somewhat regularly. And her key insight that really helped me realize game is winnable without throwing hours and hours at it is that if all you do is see some posts that are funded by those entities and you click like on them, you are now in the top 5% of everyone on LinkedIn and how they behave. Top 5%. So you've gone straight to the top of the pile and it took you nanoseconds. Secondly, if you actually make a comment and said, congratulations, well done, company, or well done, this looks like a great project, you're now in the top 3%, because hardly anyone would do that. She says, God forbid that you would actually even write a post on the subject of the environment or homelessness. Then you would be ahead of 99% of LinkedIn users. You'd be in the top 1%. And these numbers really helped me because I always felt this game was unwinnable. But knowing that, and what people have fed back to me, is actually it's surprisingly winnable that you can get into those top 1 or 3%. So crucially, link in with the funders proactively and engage a little, maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, most days of the week. And then, as Michelle says, once you've done that, you switch it off and you start your day's work, and your other LinkedIn self is now, with the algorithm's help, at the same time making you more known, more familiar, more trusted, more attractive. And over time, some of them will reach out to you. And if ever you want to reach out to them, it will be so much more likely that they will respond to your request.
I love it, Rob. And I think some people will realise they've seen Michelle Benson's work before if they've ever been on LinkedIn and seen those wonderful artwork graphics where she draws exactly what life is like from a fundraiser's point of view. You know, please can you ask the rich list for some money? She's got this wonderful quirk of doing that. But when you listen to the podcast, you realise that's not her only talent. She's got an incredible amount of ideas and energy, and you're right, it's so practical. Yesterday I was in a coaching call with someone from an organisation who said he changed who he was following, changed who and how he was interacting with them on LinkedIn, managed to get a meeting in with a company, and in that meeting they talked about his LinkedIn post. And he was like, honestly, Ben, I wrote this post hoping that they're the sort of donor that would be listening to it. And they even mentioned it, and yet now they're talking about and have agreed part of the charity that company will be funding. I love this episode. So yeah, Rob, what number was it again?
Nice round number, easy to remember, 150. So Ben, we need to wrap up. Thank you ever so much for bringing your ideas about certain episodes that really fundraisers could potentially make time for if they only have time for a few. I really appreciate it. Maybe the last thing to say is, apart from to thank you for all your help this year and the various episodes you've created with me, is to thank our listeners for listening at all. I know it's hard, but also for supporting our show, for sharing the show on LinkedIn and elsewhere, and for sharing these shows with their teams. It does make such a difference when Ben and I create these episodes if you can spread the word. So I do appreciate all your help all year long, dear listener, for helping us do what we do. As long as you're able to keep doing that and give us this lovely feedback, Ben and I will continue to make as many episodes as we can in the coming year. Good luck with your fundraising. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
So, dear listener, we're nearing the end of our second roundup episode, and I have a question for you. Did you enjoy today's show? If so, I have a favour to ask. Please take a moment to share it with your colleagues and with other charities via LinkedIn. This makes such a difference as we try and help as many good causes as we can. Thank you ever so much for your help. As we always do, we'll put links to all 4 of the episodes we mentioned and a summary in the show notes on the podcast section of the Bright Spot website. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll probably also like our previous one. That's episode 168, where we share highlights from 4 more that have proved especially popular. If you've not already subscribed to our show, do find and click the button now. You'll get instant access through your phone to dozens more examples and tips to help you with your fundraising. Over the last couple of months, I've been recording new episodes with some brilliant, generous fundraisers, and I'm really excited to share them over the next few weeks. So don't miss out on the chance to receive those straight away. If you find this podcast or our Breakfast Club for Fundraising Leaders helpful, and you're curious about the difference it would make if you could go much deeper, why not try one of our masterclasses, like our famous Wow Your Donors Day, or one of our mastery programs in corporate or major gifts fundraising, or some bespoke training for your team. After many years testing what works, I'm really proud of how these courses help your whole team to learn effective strategies, feel more confident, and grow fundraising results. To find out more or to request a chat, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. Do let us know what you think about today's episode. Ben and I are both on LinkedIn, and thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fundraising Bright Spot show. Good luck, and I can't wait to share more Bright Spot stories with you very soon.